Okay, I think we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Cherry Kubota, sitting in Columbus campus, the Ohio State University. So welcome to the Indoor Ag Science Cafe. This is the May Cafe. We have been doing that in a monthly basis. So if you are new to this cafe, really appreciate, you found this and then decided to join us. This is an open discussion forum. But a couple of things I wanted to emphasize. Please mute, because I said unmuted to start with, so that you kind of get used to the system, because I want to do more interactive way. So mute your microphone. Using a left lower corner. There is an icon there. Otherwise, I have to do here, the force to mute your microphone. And then in that situation, it might be difficult to unmute in some cases. So just please mute phone or microphone, okay? All right, so as usual, just to give a little bit of schedule. So May Cafe is going to be with a topic presenter, Dr. Roberto Lopez, Michigan State University. And June Cafe is going to be with Nate Story, Plenty. And then there is no cafe in July. And August, we haven't decided the date yet, but Nadia Saba, Dr. Greenhouse, is going to talk about indoor farming, not the greenhouse, indoor farming HVAC system. So that's going to be quite useful and interesting. So stay tuned. And then there are open dates for the other 4 months, and then we will be filling up a topical presenter for that. So the basically idea is 20 to 30 minutes at the beginning, we will have a topical presenter. And then that part is going to be recorded and then shared in a YouTube channel. And then the part 2 is an open discussion. It can be just follow-up Q&A, or it can be anything unrelated. So the basic idea of this forum is an open discussion to help each other and develop the community of indoor farming. So that's pretty much the purpose. So, okay, so the part 1, our topical presenter again is the Dr. Roberto Lopez, and Roberto is going to talk about producing high quality microgreens under soil source lighting. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing here, and then would you like to invite Dr. Lopez to share his screen.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sherry, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. And as Sherry said today, basically I'm going to be talking about producing high quality microgreens under soil source lighting. But before we get started, I'm not sure everyone's background, but I want to basically give you some background information on why folks are interested in growing microgreens and as well as consuming them. So microgreens are basically young vegetable or herb seedlings that are that you basically consume the stem, the cotyledons or the seed leaves, as well as the first true leaves. They're not sprouts. And luckily, microgreens have not had the bad press that sprouts have had over the last several years. So typically, they're harvested when they're young, tender, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches tall. And as you can see in the photograph here, oftentimes they're used at higher end restaurants, but again, consumers use them at home, mainly for the color, the flavor, and the texture. So they do add a visual appearance, but as well as obviously some of the benefits that we'll talk about later. They're also sometimes referred to as vegetable confetti. So again, relatively easy to grow as long as you know what you're doing. And I think one of the appealing things for growers is that it's a very short production time, anywhere from 7 to 14 days. Some species could go up to 3 weeks. And there's obviously the potential for year-round production. So folks that are maybe producing in greenhouses, that's something that you can do during the off season if you do ornamentals. But for indoor production, again, benefits year-round, and very minimal space requirement compared to other crops. Now, this is why a lot of chefs and consumers are really excited about microgreens, as they're referred to as a superfood. So they're rich in phytonutrients as well as secondary plant metabolites. And research has shown that they're anywhere from 4 to 6 times more nutrient dense than, let's say, their mature counterparts. So there's a wide variety of microgreens that are used. Here's just a general list. As you can see, there's there's herbs, there's vegetables, some common, some not so common, that are often used as microgreens. So when we look at this list, the vast majority are in the Brassicaceae, and one of the reasons that they are typically used is that they're fast growing. So we see this list where we have the Kohlrabi, Mizuna, mustard. Those are typically the most popular, and again, because they're fast growing. And then you can see some of the others that are not as fast growing. But when you think about a 7 to 14 day production, it's much faster than most other crops that we grow. So they're often marketed as specialty mixes, and here's just a list of some of those mixes, anywhere from sweet to spicy. And this is probably why chefs really like microgreens, is the variety of colors, textures, and flavors. This is a production facility that I visited in Canada last year, and was actually they allowed us to taste all of the varieties, and it was quite a great experience to be able to taste all of these various microgreens. So in terms of production, for smaller operations, they typically will use their hand sewing, as we can see in the photograph, utensils or pepper shakers. But it's really important to know the quantity of seed that you're using per flat. So research at Cornell has shown that that quantity can be very important in terms of the biomass that you're going to harvest. Here's an example of a much larger greenhouse, or excuse me, a much larger operation that is basically, as you can see here, the seed is being dropped. It's going, the trays are going on a conveyor belt, and you're basically applying seed over that flat. However, with this method, you don't necessarily know, again, how much seed is being placed per tray. So just some general environmental and cultural parameters before we get to the meat and potatoes of the talk, which is on lighting. Is typical recommendation, and a lot of this information is from Cornell, around 3,600 seeds per tray. So when you think about, that's a lot of seed, but most of these seeds are relatively inexpensive. And the general recommendation is to use a peat and perlite substrate, and having about a 2-inch height of that substrate within that tray. So again, all of these are costs, and so 2 inches of substrate has been shown to produce a nice crop. Again, you're not going to have it in that tray for very long. Typical pH requirement may be slightly lower than most other greenhouse crops. In terms of the water holding capacity, anywhere from 55 to 70%. Good aeration. Of course, you're going to be growing, very dense plant material. So again, you want some aeration. Lower end of fertility, so about 100 parts per million constant feed of nitrogen, and then a relatively warm temperature set point of around 72, and this is, of course, a general recommendation. For indoor production, not a lot of work has been done in terms of CO2, so again, now general recommendation is ambient CO2 levels. So harvesting, again, this is something in terms of food safety that folks need to think about. Again, this could be very labor intensive, so smaller operations will use scissors or some sort of electric grass shear. So you can see here's some examples of some trays that have already been harvested. This is a larger operation. Of course, this is for baby greens, but just to kind of show you how you can harvest microgreens. So this is basically a drill. It's being, there's a mechanical shear underneath, cutting the baby greens, and then basically collecting them in this sack. So some of the post-harvest considerations when producing microgreens, they're often sold in a wide variety of methods. They can be sold basically by loose weight or placed in clamshells, typically, obviously, for grocery stores. Some folks will actually sell the entire tray. So this is, as we can see in this example, this is a biodegradable tray that can be sold to consumers, or they're cut and placed in the bag. They can also, as I said before, be sold as living microgreens. Obviously, refrigeration is going to extend the shelf life, but again, extended refrigeration is going to lose some of those nutrients, which the consumer is obviously looking for. One important thing to note is that washing will reduce the overall appearance and shelf life, so it's important to let the consumer know that microgreens are often not washed. And again, you must follow food safety protocols. So this is why growers are interested in microgreens, is that wholesale value. I mean, there's obviously a large range. It's dependent on your market and location, but anywhere from $20 to $95 per pound wholesale. So quite lucrative. Typically, as I said before, sold in plastic clamshells of anywhere to 4 to 8 ounces by weight. This is some numbers that Neil Mattson from Cornell provided me, just looking at some of the economics. So let's say that you're growing Mizuna, for example, and you yield 7.3 ounces per flat, and you're at, say, the lower end at $28 per pound. So with a gross revenue of about $12.75, expenses in terms of seed, obviously your growing space, labor, etc., a little over $4. So your net revenue is about $8.57 per flat. What about markets? So here's a list of a wide variety of markets. Obviously, this is probably you talk to any marketing specialist and they're going to tell you need to have a market before you start producing these microgreens. But again, a lot of folks that start off early on typically will sell to chefs or farmers markets and then expand to other areas. So before we get started in terms of talking about lighting, should I ask for questions now or wait till later, Jerry?
We can wait later.
Okay. So basically, as I said, the meat and potatoes of today's talk is basically to look at lighting. So I'd say there's probably maybe 3 or 4 institutions in the U.S. that are focused on microgreens. Most of it has been on lighting, and some folks are working on greenhouse lighting, others on sole source lighting. So today we're going to talk about sole source lighting, providing different light intensities and qualities. And basically what we wanted to do is look at the overall growth, morphology, anthocyanins or color, as we can see with this example here, phenolics, and nutritional content of just brassica microgreens. Again, as I said earlier, those are the most popular microgreens. In terms of, here's the plant material that we use. So we had Kohlrabi, we had mustard, and Mizuna, and we used a walk-in environmental grow chamber where we had a 16-hour photo period. Our temperature set points were 70 day, 63 night, and we had a 50 to 60% relative humidity. Now, earlier I indicated that target should be ambient carbon dioxide. Now, the reason that we were up to 500 parts per million is that basically a lot of humans in the building, it was difficult to actually maintain a carbon dioxide level at ambient. So that's why we had to go up to 500. So in this study, we actually used fiber pad hydroponic trays instead of using a soilless peat-based substrate. And we provided 300 milliliters of a 25% Hoagland's nutrient solution. So this is a nutrient solution that's typically used in scientific studies, but it's a well-balanced fertilizer. So in terms of our lighting treatments, we use the Philips production module. These are some of the older modules. And you can see there's various light quantities. So in terms of the first treatment, basically just red and blue light. And then with the second treatment, we added in, or we had the addition of far red or the addition of green light. In terms of our light intensities, we knew we were definitely providing much higher light intensities than most growers would provide for microgreens. But again, we wanted to see how that would affect the overall quality, flavor, etc. So anywhere from 6 to 18 moles of light, or light intensities of 105 all the way up to 15 micromoles per meter squared per second. Again, the lights were on for 16 hours each day. So here's just an example of our light treatment. So again, you can see, with this treatment, obviously it's appearance of white light, so much easier to see the plant material than with the treatments that just had red and blue, or far red and blue light. Here's our spectral output. So again, here's our treatment with green light, our just red and blue, and our treatment with far red light, and our increasing light intensity. So you can see the peak wavelengths under each treatment. The data that we collected, again, this is all of importance for producers, is the hypocaudal length. So again, when we think of microgreens, we're going to have to harvest those. So we want to have some elongation to be able to harvest. Leaf area is obviously of importance. Probably the most important is fresh weight. We also looked at percent dry weight, carotenoids, anthocyanins, phenolics, as well as both macro and micronutrients. So here is the results of our mustard study. So we have our increasing daily light integral from 6 to 18 moles of light, and our 3 light qualities. And as we can see, as we increase that light intensity, or the daily light integral, with mustard, we see an increase in anthocyanin production. So obviously that's something that we are interested in. And when we look at a side view, as we would expect under lower light intensities, our microgreens are going to stretch. Obviously, we have that shade avoidance response because we have such close or tight densities. But again, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, because again, we're going to have to come through and harvest these microgreens, where here it might be slightly more difficult. So let's look at the hypocaudal length. Basically, we found that it decreases with increasing daily light integral, and not much of an effect in terms of light intensity. We would probably expect that with the addition of far red light, that we would have a slight increase in hypocaudal length, but really we didn't see much of an increase in terms of with mustard. What about leaf area? So leaf area, again, can be important, but we found that leaf area decreased with increasing daily light integral. So again, basically no difference in terms of light quality when it came to leaf area at a low daily light integral. Again, here, no significant difference in terms of light quality, but again, a much smaller leaf area with increasing DLI. Carotenoids, interestingly, decreased as the daily light integral increased. So is this a good or a bad thing? Well, we'll talk about this at the end. So when we look at alpha carotene, basically there were no statistical differences. However, with beta carotene, we can see that with red and blue radiation and red, blue, and far red radiation, we definitely had a decrease in carotenoids as that light intensity increased. What about total carotenoids? Again, across all light qualities, again, we saw that at the higher light intensities, we typically had a decrease in total carotenoids. In terms of macronutrients and micronutrients, again, we saw a decrease with increasing light intensities. So we can attribute this to what's referred to as the dilution effect. But with mustard, we saw significant decreases in potassium, calcium, magnesium, boron, and zinc. And it tended to vary between the species. So you can see for Mizuna, as well as Kohlrabi. some of those decreases with increasing light levels. So here we have Kohlrabi. Again, we see that not a whole lot of differences in terms of light quality, but in terms of light intensity, we did have some differences. And again, similar to the previous example where we had some elongation under those lower light intensities. So here we looked at total anthocyanins, and even though with Kohlrabi it doesn't necessarily have a lot of anthocyanins as we saw earlier with the mustard, we saw some very significant effects where under the lowest light intensities, we had much lower anthocyanins compared to at higher light intensities, and not much of a difference in terms of light quality, only when you really got up to those again, higher light intensity. So again, we have something counter, right? We want more beta carotene, we want more nutrients in our microgreens, but we also want that color. So we'll talk a little bit about this later. So in terms of growth and morphology, we found that biomass production increased under the higher light intensities, but it wasn't as dramatic as we would have thought. So let's say when we compared a daily light integral of 6 moles to 18 moles of light, yes, that's a big increase in the amount of light that you're providing those microgreens, but we didn't see that much of an increase in biomass. The leaf area, again, decreased under higher light intensities. Hypocaudal length, again, decreased, as well as the macro and micronutrients when that daily light integral increased. We did find that increased DLI led to increased anthocyanin content and, again, decreased carotenoids. So I guess the good part of this is it shows that you can produce microgreens in relatively low light levels. And some subsequent studies that we want to look at is what if you grow your microgreens under a relatively low daily light integral, let's say 6 to 8 moles, and then at the end, right before harvest, you hit them with a much higher light intensity to increase those anthocyanins. So that's some work that we're proposing to do. If you would like to read a little more about these studies, obviously it was a very quick overview. We have 3 papers that we've published. One of them is in Greenhouse Grower, and then the other 2 are in Hort Science and the Journal of the American Society of Horticultural Science. So you can, the first 2 will probably be a little difficult for you to access, but you can send me an email and I'd be more than happy to send you those articles. Again, there's also some other links that I provided here in terms of general microgreen production, whether it's in a greenhouse or indoors, as well as looking at nutrition, marketing, and food safety. So I'd like to thank the USDA SCRI program for providing funding for this study, as well as Hort Americas and Phillips for providing lights. And with that, I think we are doing quite well on time, so we'll open it up to any questions you might have.